This paper emphasizes the fact that our CDC isolation and quarantine guidance has simply never been long enough, underpinning how absurd the 24-hour isolation guidance currently is, where the median self-reported time to recovery from COVID infection was 20 days, and an estimated 22.5% had not recovered by 90 days. Before we dive in, we need to go over a high-level overview of statistics. This will help us understand why they're reporting on the median data as opposed to the average data or the mean data. So typically when we're describing a population, we have an average spread like this, where if we're talking about a COVID infection in this type of data scenario, then the average infection and the most common infection would be occurring within this range right here, and then you would have outliers that were very long and outliers that were very short. However, COVID doesn't appear to be like that. For COVID, we have a right skew or a positive skew, where people are getting most commonly sick for this interval of time, but a not uncommon number of people are getting sick for very long periods of time. Again, for acute infections here that we're talking about. So when we have a right skew like this, where the average number is going to be pulled over to this skew, then when we're trying to talk about the most common frequency of symptom duration, it might be more appropriate to represent the median for that, the middle number of your data set, as it's going to have less impact by skewness, by those very long duration sickness individuals. Now that we understand this, we can better appreciate the paper, where it collected data from April 1st, 2020 through February 28th, 2023 on adults age 18 years or older with self-reported COVID infections, where for the 4,708 participants, they found that the mean recovery time was 35.4 days, and the median time to recovery was 20 days, or between 8 and 75 days, where recovery by 90 days was positively associated with vaccination prior to infection, meaning that if you got vaccinated, you were more likely to recover, and recovery from COVID infection did not appear to be associated with age, educational attainment, smoking history, obesity, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, asthma, or any other comorbidities. And these results were similar for reinfections. Put another way, it means that if you're perfectly healthy, it did not seem to matter in regards to symptom duration of infection. Additionally, in this cohort study, they found that 20% of adults did not recover within 3 months of their COVID infection, which is the same as 1 in 5. Where this plot shows the median time to recovery following COVID infection for vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals, where the important thing to note is that for unvaccinated individuals, they were sick most frequently for a longer period of time than people that were vaccinated. I do need to highly caution you in the interpretation of this chart for trends, because we know two very important pieces of information that influence this. The first is that they had progressively less data as time went on, where when we looked at the supplemental information from their surveys, they had approximately 29,000 responses for 2020 to 2021. They had approximately 20,000 responses for 2021 to 2022. And then for 2023, they had incredibly limited data, meaning that the earlier numbers are more reliable than the later numbers. The next thing from their questionnaire is that not everyone that is self-reporting for COVID had a COVID test, which cut those numbers down even further, giving us confirmed and probable cases within their data set, bringing us to that 4,708 number. And the second most important thing is that by 2022, we had direct evidence that people didn't start testing positive on their rapid tests until between days 3 and 5 after symptoms start, when prior you would have a positive test within the first 24 hours of testing. So if we raise all of these levels by 3 to 5 days, that puts them perfectly in line with prior median values. For instance, this is about 16, and if we raise that between 3 to 5 days, that brings it to 18 to 20. And similarly, if we look at the unvaccinated for which is about 14, and we raise that 3 to 5, that's 17 to 19. And the reason we would do this is because, as we saw in the supplemental information, they're only looking at confirmed positive tests. And if you're starting your positive test as your day 1 or day 0 from your initial time point, and that's not starting until 3 to 5 days after symptoms happen, that's going to highly influence and artificially lower your median values in your whole time plots for this part of the data. So it's important to take into consideration these alternative factors and not just look at this and say, oh, COVID is becoming shorter duration over time. That's not true. Or at least it's not true as what's represented here. Additionally, compared with receipt of at least 2 doses of mRNA vaccine, receipt of a single dose was not significantly associated with recovery by 90 days, which is why it's so important to continue to update your vaccinations, because any impact that you could have had from the vaccine a long time ago has waned, which means that it's basically nothing. And again, while the median is good to report on as like the most frequent occurrence of your duration of symptoms for COVID in this paper, it's important to remember that when we're thinking about statistics, that what we want to set our guidance to is around that 95% level having cleared it. And when the median time interval is 20 days of self reported symptoms and the average time interval is 35 days of self reported symptoms of COVID infection, well, then a 24-hour respiratory guidance is woefully insufficient, which underpins how wild it is to me that the CDC has this statement on their website for their facts of, do you expect an increase in COVID-19 hospitalizations and deaths as a result of these changes? And they say, we do not expect an increase in COVID-19 hospitalizations and deaths as a result of this updated guidance. Then that is just simple madness to me, because you're guaranteeing that people are spreading COVID for a very long time with one another, for most commonly between 20 and 35 days.